In the 80s, every kid knew about Freddy Krueger, the child killer who gets burned to death, then comes back in people's nightmares. So I heard about him before I ever saw any of the movies. I knew about the gloves, the striped sweater, and that he was a wise-cracking ghoul.
Come to Freddy.
But with the first Nightmare movie, it leans more towards pure horror than gags, though there are a few gags too. Before this, most slasher films were just a guy with a knife going around killing people, but Nightmare brought a new twist to the genre. The first Nightmare on Elm Street reminds me of the original Halloween in that it has a suburban atmosphere and teenagers having sex, or at least trying to. So we have Nancy, Tina, Rod, and Glenn, and yes, Glenn is played by Johnny Depp. I bet none of the actors in this knew they were working with one of the biggest future stars of Hollywood, though Depp was new at the time and is actually one of the weaker characters in the film. He hadn't yet matured as the respected actor we know today. There's just 4 kids here, whereas the later Freddy films have more characters. I guess they wanted to set up more bodies for Freddy to kill off. Tina's set up at the start to be this film's lead, but she's murdered by Freddy about 18 minutes in. So then Nancy becomes the main star of the film. She quickly discovers that she needs to keep herself awake to defend herself from the horrible nightmares. She spends the majority of the movie drinking coffee and taking pills. Then there's Rod. He gets blamed for Tina's death and gets put in jail. During a dream, a blanket slowly moves around Rod's neck and hangs him. The special effect is pretty well done. Today, that blanket would have been CG, and there'd be no reason for it when it can be done with practical effects like this. It was directed by Wes Craven, and it's really interesting the way he depicts the dream sequences. For example, a person might go from a boiler room to the outside of the house just by jumping. Just like in a dream, locations just switch because none of it really makes sense. And as far as the dreams go, I think they are most effective in the first film, where in later Nightmare films, the dreams become so exaggerated with giant sets and it goes overboard. The father doesn't believe Nancy until the end of the movie. Usually with these 80s horror flicks, there will be at least one veteran actor. With Halloween, it's Donald Pleasance. With Friday the 13th, it's Betsy Palmer. And here, we have John Saxon. He's very believable in the role. Whenever I watch this movie, I get so pissed off that he doesn't listen to his daughter. The parents commit Nancy to a hospital to test her dreams and get her some help. They believe she's just traumatized because of the murders. While in the hospital bed, she starts freaking out during her dream, and when she wakes up, she pulls Freddy's hat out of the dream, and still they don't believe her. Too bad she pulled out a hat. Hell, it's a dream. She should have robbed a bank and brought back a sack full of money. That would have been a plan. A fun fact, the doctor in this scene was played by Charles Fleischer, who did the voice of Roger Rabbit. She sets up a bunch of booby traps in her home, and the plan is to grab Freddy out of the dream world and into the real world where he's vulnerable to the traps. Wes Craven had a lot of his female stars become survivalists actually. Gee, Wes Craven likes booby traps a lot. The People Under the Stairs, The Hills Have Eyes. Maybe he should have directed Home Alone. The ending is different in the film than in the original script. Originally, a school bus was supposed to come up to the house and Nancy got on and just rode away into the fog. However, the producer wanted to give a hook for the possibility of a sequel, so they changed the bus to a convertible, and when the top comes down, it has Freddy's stripes, like they're in his power. And then the mother is ripped through the door by Freddy's arm. It was all about setting up the next film. Wes Craven didn't like the idea of changing the ending, and I don't blame him. But history is history, and the Nightmare on Elm Street series became a legacy. Freddy himself was played by Robert Englund in all the movies from the first one till Freddy vs. Jason, and also in the TV series Freddy's Nightmares. He's a bit different in this movie than the later incarnations, though he does joke a little. Overall, he's a bit more serious here. When you see him, he's always in shadow, and you really don't get a very good look at his face, which I like because it brings more mystery to the character. As the series went on, it leaned more towards horror comedy, and many criticize him for that reason. But this first one is truly a scary movie. There's nothing more frightening than somebody who can kill you in your sleep when you're completely helpless. For all those kids in the 80s who were afraid to go to sleep, I know how you felt, because I was one of them. And Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. With this movie, there's a new family living in the Elm Street house. The son, Jesse, starts having nightmares. The house itself gets hotter and hotter as the movie progresses. The room melts, the toaster bursts into fire, and even a parakeet erupts into flame. Damn! One night while cleaning his room, Jesse and his girlfriend find Nancy's diary. They start learning the history of what happened in the house beforehand. What's with the sunglasses, by the way? Anyway, Jesse gradually starts being consumed by Freddy. He finds his glove in the basement and then sleepwalks to a local bar, which many have said is a gay bar. In fact, people have analyzed the supposed gayness of this movie as much as they do Top Gun. I never even thought of it before. Jesse sees the coach there, who demands he goes back to school and do laps. That's pretty weird. If you saw your high school math teacher after school and they told you to pull out a calculator and start dividing fractions, wouldn't you just be like, no? So then the gym room starts going crazy like it's possessed. Weights and balls start flying all over the place. The coach is dragged into the showers by jump ropes and spanked with the towel. Then Jesse, now under Freddy's control, kills him. Later in the movie, Jesse goes to his friend Ron for help. Jesse asks Ron to watch him when he sleeps, but that doesn't work because Jesse starts freaking out and literally turns into Freddy. Freddy actually explodes out Jesse's chest and rips what's left of his body to shreds. Then Freddy murders Ron, who's screaming for help. The camera pans back and Jesse's standing there unharmed. The movie doesn't have too many kills, which is a little disappointing. The best part is when Freddy gets loose in the party and starts slicing people up. One guy tells Freddy to calm down and relax. Sure, that'll work. At the end, the girlfriend goes to the power plant where Freddy used to be employed. For some reason, she knows this is where she has to go. On the way in, she sees two fucked up dogs. I guess the faces are Ron and the coach. I suppose this is before they establish that the souls of people Freddy kills goes into his chest. They kill off Freddy, then at the very end, Freddy's in control of the school bus. That's how the movie started, a dream where an out-of-control bus goes off a cliff. There needed to be a few more cool dream sequences in this movie like that, and I think that's where it's lacking the most. Who's that driving the bus? Yep, that's Freddy. Imagine if Freddy Krueger was driving you to school. That'd be awesome. Overall, the second movie is not as good as the first, but not as bad as most people make it out to be. Check it out. A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. This one is almost as good as the first one. In fact, it may be my personal favorite. It has the right balance of Freddy humor without going overboard, and introduces the idea of taking control in your dream. Heather Langenkamp is back as Nancy and is likable. You root for her all the way, and I really enjoy the personalities of the different patients at the hospital. And I also love the nerdy kid who wishes he was a Dungeons & Dragons wizard. Supposedly the scene with the wizard kid went on longer because he's wearing a Dracula cape and shoots lasers at his fingers. There is more to this, but I guess it was cut for time. I don't think it matters anyway where the Dracula cape came from, because it's a dream, and I always just assumed that it was his wizard outfit. The new lead is Patricia Arquette as Kristen. Kristen has the power to pull others into her dreams, which she uses to her advantage whenever she needs help fighting Freddy. Each of the kids are killed off in different and inventive ways. The first to go is Philip. Freddy pulls his veins out and drags him around like a puppet, then sends him off the top of a tower. The most classic kill that I always remember is when Jennifer's pulled into the TV with a pair of robotic arms. We also get to learn a little more history of Freddy, and whenever they reveal something about his past, it's always something real fucked up that happened to him. One of the cast members that plays a hospital aide is none other than Cowboy Curtis himself, Lawrence Fishburne. He doesn't add too much to the movie, but he's good even if it is just a bit part. To get rid of Freddy this time, Nancy finds her father, again played by John Saxon, and she asks him where Freddy's bones are buried. The plan is to give Freddy's actual body a proper burial, and that would put him to rest. What's awesome is that when they find the bones, it comes alive into a skeleton with stop-motion animation, just like Jason and the Argonauts. But again, isn't this the real world, so how are the bones moving? Well, apparently Freddy leaves the dream world and takes possession of the bones. It's a little odd, but I don't even care, because it's so awesome. Another cool effect besides the skeleton is when Freddy becomes claymation. That stuff's great too. Most seem to agree that Nightmare 1 and 3 are the best of the series. They're both good for different reasons. A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master. With Nightmare Part 4, it was the first time Robert Englund got top billing. No reason to keep it a mystery anymore. We all know he was the man. So let's see, at the end of the last movie, they successfully kill Freddy by laying his bones to rest. Holy water is thrown on him, and he's pretty much finished off. With Nightmare 4, they had to find a way to bring him back, and I don't think it makes much sense. But regardless, Freddy's back, and so is the remaining cast of characters that survived from Nightmare 3. Freddy kills them all, and the new cast takes over. It's a shame they kill off the characters from Dream Warriors though, because they were all interesting and likable. We get Sheila, who's some girl with asthma problems. Freddy sucks the air out of her in a classroom scene. The effect looks too ridiculous to be scary. Kristen from the last film is a different actress. In Part 3, she was played by Patricia Arquette. In Part 4, she's recast and played by Tuesday Knight. She's killed off almost right away. The biggest problem I see is that it doesn't seem to follow any of the rules of the previous films. In the first movie, you know when you're seeing a dream, and that's where Freddy was. He had to be pulled out of the dream by Nancy. None of that seems to apply here. It's just all over the place, and there's no world rules. Also, after he kills off the characters from Dream Warriors, what is the point of him killing more people? Wasn't the whole point of Freddy to get revenge on the parents that burned him? That's why Freddy stalked and killed the Elm Street kids. But now they're all dead, so he's just killing random teenagers. There's not enough blood, even when Freddy's stabbing someone. Come on, let's see some blood! The new lead character here is Alice, played by Lisa Wilcox. She gains Kristen's power to pull people into dreams. The new cast gradually dies off, and as they do, Alice also gains their powers. So by getting all this power, Alice becomes the Dream Master. At least I think that's what it is. Who knows, maybe Freddy's supposed to be the Dream Master. One of the teenagers is good at karate. He fights Freddy. Freddy kills him. So when he dies, now Alice is a karate master. She gets the power. Each kid that dies off, she gets some new skill. Alice puts on clothing from all her deceased friends, and that means she also has that stuff on when she's dreaming? So if I put on a pair of red shoes and went to sleep, I would have that in the dream? She kills Freddy off, and I have to say, the special effects here are top notch. All the children's souls emerge from his body and rip him to shreds. I saw this when I was a kid, and I thought it was fucking disgusting. You can notice here it says Crave In. Get it? Like Wes Craven? Too bad he wasn't involved in this movie, or it might have been better. A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. Well, first of all, it doesn't even say Part 5 during the movie. It's only on the poster. I guess this is where they started not giving them numbers. This one's a mixed bag because it's got some good ideas and some really dumb ones. Alice Johnson, played by Lisa Wilcox, and Dan Jordan, played by Danny Hassel, are back from Nightmare Part 4. They get together, and now Alice is pregnant. The basic idea is that Freddy is using the baby's dreams to get at people while Alice is awake. Not only that, after Freddy kills someone, he places their souls into the baby, trying to make the kid like himself. That's a pretty neat idea. The movie does have a lot of good special effects work. When Alice's friend Greta dies, that's quite a mess. There's some cool stop-motion scenes in the fridge. What is this, Pee-wee's Playhouse? When Freddy emerges from inside Alice, it looks pretty good, and the pool dream sequence has some interesting animation. They reveal some backstory to Freddy. His mother was a nun who got locked in an asylum and raped by a bunch of maniacs. It's some sick stuff, and that's Robert Englund as one of the inmates. With the teenagers in this movie, it's so predictable what's going to happen to them as soon as you see them. There's a nerdy comic book kid named Mark. The first time you see him, he's drawn some superhero in a sketchbook. And as soon as you see that, you know there's going to be a dream about it later. And of course there is. Mark turns into that superhero and fights Freddy. And he gets killed, comic book style. It's kind of creative, but I wouldn't say it's scary. To kill off Freddy this time, Alice has her friend Yvonne go to the asylum to try and find Krueger's mother and lay her to rest. She finds her there, puts her hand on her shoulder, then she disappears. Afterwards, she's in the dream world and takes Freddy away. I don't get it, especially since this character, Amanda Krueger, is in Part 3, and nobody touches her shoulder and makes her disappear then. Nightmare 5 is definitely not my favorite. It's still entertaining to watch, but it's convoluted and kind of forgettable. Freddys Dead, The Final Nightmare. This is where the series gets really silly, but has its highlights. A kid's on a plane and slips into a dream, like the Wizard of Oz. He looks out the window and sees Freddy acting like the Wicked Witch. That's how this movie starts out, really goofy off the bat. There's cameos from Roseanne and Tom Arnold. Also, Alice Cooper as Freddy's dad, now that's awesome. And Johnny Depp is in there too, on the TV, which I think is one of the funniest parts. This unnamed kid who has amnesia ends up at a homeless shelter, where we meet this film's new group of teenagers. They immediately set up each character's personality traits to exploit later in the film. A girl that doesn't want to be touched, a deaf kid, and a kid who does drugs. You can already predict the dream sequences. The last few movies were really light on kills. There's a scene where this guy Carlos is dreaming, and Freddy punctures his eardrum. Then he grows another one, and the eardrum is ultra sensitive to sound. First, Freddy drops some pins, which is painful, but then Freddy pulls out the chalkboard, scratches his claws on it, and Carlos's head explodes. Great scene, and anyone who hates claws on a chalkboard can only imagine what it's like with Freddy's gloves. But then there's the death scenes that go overboard. Spencer is a pothead and likes video games. Freddy makes him trip out, which is funny because Spencer's only smoking weed, not LSD. Anyway, he ends up inside the TV, and then Freddy controls him like it's a video game. Spencer's bounced all around the house while Freddy spews out one-liners. This is a perfect example of Freddy playing entirely for comedy. Then there's the scene where John's falling from the sky in a parachute. Freddy cuts the straps, and John falls onto a bed of spikes. Freddy pushes the spikes on the street, and it almost resembles a Roadrunner cartoon with Wile E. Coyote setting up a trap. John's impaled by the spikes, and in the real world, he's bleeding to death. The woman who runs the shelter is this film's lead lady. Her name is Maggie, and she's revealed to be Freddy's daughter. There's some more dream scenes that give insight into Freddy's past. He had a daughter and killed his wife. We also find out where Freddy got his dream powers from. Some flying sperm made him the master of dreams. Yeah, I think someone was like, hey, we need more things that will fly toward the screen. This is supposed to be 3D, guys. Yes, that's another thing about it. Certain scenes were filmed in 3D. Maggie wants to put a stop to her father's killing spree, and the plan here is to pull Freddy out of the dream world and kill him when he's human, which is basically what Nancy did in the first movie. Freddy actually lists the ways he was killed in the last movies, but he doesn't mention most of them. What about part 2 where he's killed by the power of love? What about part 4 or 5? Whatever, those deaths are so weird to explain anyway. I guess they didn't want to remind audiences how absurd they were. So how do they kill off Freddy this time? Maggie gets him pinned to a wall, puts a pipe bomb in his chest, and blows him up. Really? That's it? Just blown up? That's how James Bond villains are supposed to die, not a being that lives in people's dreams. Maybe this ending looked okay in theaters when it was in 3D, but that's all it is, just a gimmick. The DVD comes with 3D glasses, so you can try it at home, but it still looks like shit. So that's it, Freddy's dead. But nobody should have trusted that title because he comes back. Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Part 6, Freddy's Dead, was a terrible way to end the series, so that's why we needed Part 7 to give proper conclusion to the story of Freddy Krueger. Wes Craven returns with New Nightmare, a unique approach to the Freddy legacy. This film steps outside of the Freddy universe to show the filmmakers actually making the movie, and then the movie becomes real. Wes Craven plays himself, who realizes the Freddy character is stepping into the real world, so the only way he can keep him in the fictional world where he belongs is to make another Freddy movie. Heather Langenkamp is the main star. It focuses just on her rather than a whole bunch of disposable characters like before. In order to stop Freddy, she has to become the character Nancy for real. She carries the whole film and does a great job. One thing that gets a little excessive is that she feels earthquakes all the time. After the first 3, it's like, geez, we get it. There's also Robert Englund as himself, Robert Englund on a stage playing Freddy, and there's the real Freddy. It's a bit confusing to explain, but it all works pretty well. The real Freddy is given a dark makeover. They did a good job reinventing him and making him scary again. He looks a lot like Nosferatu with the long claws. Not to mention, Robert Englund based Freddy's body language off Klaus Kinski's portrayal in the 1979 version of Nosferatu. But I have to say, I don't care for the green hat they gave him. I wish they could have kept it the same. Oh no, it's the kid from Full House, Miko Hughes. But actually, he's pretty good too. He's also pretty good in Pet Sematary, which is surprising because sometimes child actors can be annoying. John Saxon's back, and he's great as usual. In this film, Freddy's supposed to be an ancient demon trying to break into the real world, and to do so, he's attacking Heather's son, creating fear so he can be released. It's a good concept, and the final scenes with Freddy in hell is really disturbing, especially the part with his tongue coming out. Man, that's freaky. I do think this is a great entry in the series, and one of the best, just not as good as the original. At the end of 1993's Jason Goes to Hell, Freddy's glove pulls Jason's mask underground, and since then, everyone was talking about the idea of Freddy versus Jason, but it took 10 years for the movie to actually happen. The wait was worth it, and it's one of the best versus movies. A shame they don't make more like this. The plot here is basically Freddy's power has grown weak because people have forgotten him, so he disguises himself as Jason's mother and tells him to go after the kids on Elm Street. Jason goes on a rampage creating fear. Freddy uses that fear to regain his power, but then Freddy gets pissed off because Jason's taken all his victims, and then they end up fighting. A bizarre plot, but hey, it works, and it's a great excuse to get him to fight. Both villains have their own strengths and weaknesses. Jason was originally killed by drowning, so his weakness is water. Freddy was killed by fire, so that's his weakness. So it's like a battle of the elements. Whenever you see Jason, you often see the color blue, and when it's Freddy, everything's a fiery red. There's a pothead character that looks like Jason Mewes, from Jay and Silent Bob, but that's not him, although it seems like he's trying to be. There's some inconsistencies with the previous films. There's a scene where a girl falls asleep in a bathroom. Freddy cuts her nose off, then she wakes up like she's completely fine. Did they just forget that if Freddy hurts you in a dream, then he hurts you in real life? The good thing about this movie is that Freddy and Jason don't just meet up at the end for one fight. No, they have quite a few fights, and they beat the shit out of each other. Freddy is more powerful when they're in the dream world, and Jason is stronger when they're in reality. It's great that they established that because otherwise it seems Freddy would have won too easily. I like how they use each other's weapons. Freddy uses Jason's machete, and Jason stabs Freddy with his own glove. There's lots of blood, too. If I just walked into the theater during this scene without even knowing who Freddy or Jason was, I'd be like, what the fuck is this? It seems like with these movies, nobody wants to see their favorite monster lose, so they always keep the outcome vague. It's like Frankenstein meets the Wolfman and King Kong vs. Godzilla. You know what I just realized? They all have something to do with water. Yeah, Frankenstein the Wolfman gets swept away in a flood, King Kong and Godzilla roll into the sea, and Freddy and Jason fall into a lake. At first it looks like Jason wins, but then we see Freddy wink, so something is up. Supposedly, the original idea for the ending would have showed them both going to hell and then meeting Pinhead, who says, "Gentlemen, what seems to be the problem?" But they couldn't get the rights to Pinhead. Why not have Freddy versus Jason versus Pinhead? Why not Leatherface versus Michael Myers or Chucky versus Leprechaun? The door is completely open for more versus movies, and they would make serious money, so it makes you wonder why the fuck don't they make more of these kind of movies? So this would end my review of the Nightmare on Elm Street series, but unfortunately there's a remake. Even though it doesn't have Robert Englund and it's not part of the same series, I guess I should still say something about it. The production value is high, it looks slick, and it goes back to being serious. I guess that's a good thing, but it still makes you wonder why even bother. It recycles so much stuff from the original movie, it comes off as stale. It has the body bag in the hallway, the girl flying above the bed, the claw in the bathtub, and Freddy coming out of the wall. At least it's not as horrendous as the remake of Psycho, which literally copied every shot in the whole fucking movie. Anyone involved with that wasted their time. Vince Vaughn as Norman Bates. Oh god, anyway, back to Nightmare. Of course, the coming out of the wall part was CG, and it looks like total crap. The original looked far better, and it was just a spandex sheet across the hole in the wall with careful lighting. The teenagers are all dull, especially Nancy. She doesn't have an ounce of the charisma Heather Langenkamp had. The new Freddy, Jackie Earle Haley, sounds like the Christian Bale Batman, just like he did in Watchmen.
You can't save her!
I knew that if they kept making Freddy movies, they'd have to get somebody different than Robert Englund eventually. I mean, how many times can one guy play the role? He deserves to retire from it, but couldn't they at least get the makeup to look right? It looks like melted cheese. If anything, his face should be all scrawny and eaten away, not all covered up with pounds of makeup like he's got a wet grocery bag over his face. One good thing I can say is the dream sequences are done with good taste, usually taking place in a boiler room or a classroom or something. That's more believable than, say, being sucked into a video game or becoming a comic book superhero or whatever the fuck. But other than that, the remake just shouldn't have been made. If you're a big Freddy fan and you want to see a new Freddy movie, this is your only option, so you can take it for what it is, but otherwise, stick to the original, Part 3, and New Nightmare. I think those were the best.